The stars glittered coldly against the blackness of space as the Arinai homeworld faced its end. Their sun, once stable and life-giving, had begun to pulse erratically, sending deadly radiation across their planet. The Arinai, a peaceful species, with blue-tinted skin and wise eyes, knew they had perhaps 1 year before their world became uninhabitable. In the highest tower of the Science Academy, Chief Scientist Tai Hyun worked frantically at his equipment. For 3 days straight, he had barely eaten or slept. His assistants Jisoo and Doyoon watched with concern as their leader's hands trembled slightly over the complex machinery. "The signal must reach as far as possible," Taehyun said, his voice rough from exhaustion. "Our nearby neighbors have already refused our requests for aid. They fear the cost of helping us." Jisoo placed a steadying hand on his shoulder. "The Council has approved your plan. Every power source on the planet is being directed to boost the signal." Taehyun nodded and made the final adjustments. The machine hummed to life, drawing enormous power from the planet's reserves. With a flash of blue light, the distress signal shot outward, carrying images of the Arinai, their dying star, and a simple message in mathematical code that any advanced species could understand. "Help us. We are dying." The signal traveled outward, reaching dozens of advanced civilizations. On the crystal spires of Vashir, scientists noted the signal, but their elders voted to ignore it. In the underwater cities of Nimba, the Council watched the Arinai's plea and turned away. They are not advanced enough to be worthy of the effort, they decided. Across the galaxy, species after species received the message and chose to do nothing. Meanwhile, on Earth, at the Global Space Communication Center in Seoul, Dr. Minji Lee sat bolt upright in her chair. It was 3:47 a.m., and she had been about to head home after a long shift monitoring deep space transmissions. "Seojun, come look at this," she called to her colleague, who was dozing at his desk. Seojun Kim rubbed his eyes and hurried over. On Minji's screen, strange patterns pulsed rhythmically. "It's too regular to be natural," she said, her eyes bright with excitement. "And look, it repeats every 73 seconds exactly." For the next week, Minji and Seojun barely left the center. They brought in other experts, including Dr. Junho Park, Earth's leading xenolinguist. Together they began to decode the message. "It's a distress call," Junho announced finally, his voice filled with awe. "There are images embedded in the signal. Look." The team gathered around as the computer screen displayed images of humanoid beings with blue skin standing before a violently flaring star. "They're dying," Minji whispered. "Their star is becoming unstable." Within hours, the United Nations Security Council convened an emergency session. Representatives from every nation watched in stunned silence as Minji and her team presented their findings. "The signal has likely reached dozens of more advanced civilizations," Minji explained. "But according to our calculations, it was sent over 3 months ago, and no one has responded." General Hyun-sik Kang, head of the International Space Agency, stood up. "Our newest ship, the Dauntless, has faster-than-light capability. It was meant for our first mission to Alpha Centauri next year, but we could redirect it," interrupted President Sophia Chen. "How long would it take to reach them?" "With our current technology, 8 months, General Kang replied. "We would need to leave within 2 weeks to have any chance of saving them." A heavy silence fell over the room. Humanity had only recently achieved faster-than-light travel. Their technology was new, untested over such distances. The risk was enormous. "We should vote," someone suggested hesitantly. President Chen shook her head. "No, some things don't require a vote. If we hear a cry for help and have the means to respond, we must try. That is what makes us human." 2 weeks later, Minji watched from mission control as the Dauntless prepared for launch. 3 other ships had been quickly retrofitted to join. The mission: colony vessels repurposed as rescue ships. Captain Ji-hoo stood on the launch platform, addressing the world via broadcast. "We go not knowing what we will find or if we will return," he said. "But we go because somewhere in the darkness, someone is calling for help, and humans answer such calls." As the ships rose into the sky, Minji felt tears on her cheeks. She didn't know if the mission would succeed. She didn't know if they would save the Arinai, but she knew that humanity had passed an important test. When faced with the suffering of strangers across the stars, they had chosen compassion over fear. The ships disappeared into the blackness, carrying Earth's message back to the Arinai. Help is coming. You are not alone. The dark emptiness of space stretched before the 4 Earth ships as they traveled deeper into the unknown than any humans had ventured before. Captain Zhou stood on the bridge of the flagship, dauntless, watching the stars streak by as they moved at faster-than-light speed. Though his face remained calm, his hands gripped the rail tightly. They were 3 months into their journey to save the Arinai, and tensions aboard the ship were growing. "Captain, I've detected something unusual," said Sunho, the ship's sensor specialist. His eyes were fixed on the screen before him. "We're picking up traces of advanced engine signatures. Other ships have passed through this sector recently." Zhou frowned. "Can you identify them?" "Based on the radiation patterns, they match at least 3 different civilizations we've catalogued from deep space observations. All technologically more advanced than us." Communications Officer Yuna looked up from her station. "They must have received the distress signal too, but they didn't stop to help." A heavy silence fell over the bridge, the knowledge that other, more capable species had chosen to ignore the Arinai's plea was troubling. Later that evening, Zhou called a meeting in the ship's common area. The crew of 80 gathered, their faces showing the strain of months in space. "We've discovered evidence that other civilizations have received the same signal we did," Zhou explained. "They chose to do nothing." Hana, the ship's doctor, stood up. "Maybe they know something we don't. Maybe this mission is more dangerous than we realized." Chief Engineer Minho shook his head. "Or maybe they just didn't care enough to help. Not everyone values life the way we do." The room erupted in debate. Some crew members argued they should turn back, while others insisted they must continue. Zhou watched silently, understanding their fear. "Enough," he finally said, his quiet voice somehow cutting through the noise. "We each volunteered for this mission knowing the risks. We represent the best of humanity. I believe we should continue, but I won't force anyone. If you wish to return to Earth, speak now." No one moved. No one spoke. Zhou nodded, feeling pride swell in his chest. "Then we continue." 2 weeks later, disaster struck. The Dauntless's main engine began to fail as they passed through an unexpected radiation cloud. Warning alarms blared throughout the ship. "The radiation is affecting the engine's containment field," Minho reported, his hands flying over the controls. "We have minutes before it collapses completely. If the engine failed, the ship would be stranded in deep space, millions of miles from any help. Worse, the radiation would flood the ship, killing everyone aboard." "We need to shut it down and switch to backup power," Zhou ordered. "The backup systems won't engage," Minho replied, his voice tight with tension. "The radiation has damaged the switching mechanism." In the engine room, Engineer Sunmi assessed the situation quickly. The only way to manually engage the backup systems was to enter the highly radioactive chamber and reset the switches by hand. It would mean certain death for whoever went in. Without hesitation, she reached for a radiation suit, knowing it would provide only minutes of protection at best. "What are you doing?" asked her assistant Doyun. "Someone has to do it," she replied simply. "There are 80 people on this ship. One life to save 80 is a fair trade." Before Doyun could stop her, Sunmi sealed her helmet and entered the chamber. The radiation meters on her suit immediately began to climb to dangerous levels. Working quickly, she reached the control panel and began the complex sequence to switch to backup power. On the bridge, the light suddenly dimmed, then came back on as the backup systems engaged. "She did it!" Minho exclaimed. When they retrieved Sunmi from the engine room, she was barely conscious. Her radiation exposure was well beyond survivable levels. As the medical team worked desperately to stabilize her, she gripped Zhihu's hand. "Was it worth it?" she whispered. "You saved everyone," he replied, tears in his eyes. "We continue our mission because of you." Against all medical expectations, Sunmi survived, though permanently weakened. Her sacrifice became a symbol of the mission's purpose. 1 month later, as they finally approached the Arinai system, they established first contact. The alien voice that came through the communication system sounded tired, but filled with wonder. "You came," the Arinai representative said simply. "Others received our message. Many have technology far superior to what we detect on your vessels, yet only you humans answered our call. Why? Jihu looked around at his crew, at Sunmi in her wheelchair on the bridge, at the faces that showed exhaustion but also determination. Because that is what humans do, he replied. We help when we can. Now tell us what you need. Through the view screen, they got their first real look at the Arinai homeworld, orbiting a dangerously unstable star that flared with deadly radiation. The rescue would not be easy, but they had come too far to fail now. The first human ships entered the Arinai system with caution. Captain Jihu ordered all sensors at maximum sensitivity as they approached the third planet, where the distress signal originated. Through the main view screen, the crew could see the Arinai sun pulsing with dangerous energy, its surface churning with massive solar storms. Life signs confirmed on the planet, reported Science Officer Mina. I'm detecting large population centers, but also significant radiation damage to their atmosphere. The 4 Earth ships established orbit around the Arinai homeworld. What the humans saw surprised them. The Arinai cities gleamed with advanced architecture. Tall spires that seemed to be made of living crystal, roads that glowed with internal light, and structures that shifted and moved in response to the environment. Their technology appears more advanced than ours in many ways, Mina observed. Yet they couldn't evacuate themselves. An Arinai delegation requested permission to board the Dauntless. Captain Jihu welcomed them in the main hangar bay. The aliens were tall and slender, with smooth blue skin that shimmered with a subtle iridescence. Their large, expressive eyes studied the humans with wonder. I am Nari, speaker for the Arinai Council, said the tallest of them, using a translation device. You have traveled far to answer our call. Jihu bowed slightly. We came as quickly as we could. I am Captain Jihu of Earth. Nari's eyes widened. Earth? We have no record of your world in our stellar catalogues. We are a young spacefaring civilization. Jihu explained. We only developed faster-than-light travel 3 years ago. The Arinai looked at each other in astonishment. Nari's voice trembled slightly as she spoke again. You risked crossing the stars with such new technology. For strangers. We couldn't ignore your distress signal, Jihu said simply. Over the next few days, the humans were shocked to discover that while the Arinai had advanced in many areas, medicine, architecture, and environmental science, they had never developed effective space travel. Their few orbiting stations were their greatest achievement. Their culture valued harmony and stability above all else, which had led to remarkable advancements in sustainable living, but left them unprepared for crisis. Our sun was stable for millions of years, explained Nari, as she showed engineer Minho. Their power systems. We never needed to leave our world. When it began to destabilize, we had no way to evacuate our people. Meanwhile, the Earth ships prepared for the massive evacuation. They could carry perhaps 40,000 Arinai, a tiny fraction of their population of millions. We need to prioritize who goes first, Jihu told the Arinai Council. We've sent a message back to Earth requesting more ships, but they won't arrive for months. As they worked on the evacuation plans, sensors detected new ships entering the system. 5 vessels, each far larger and more advanced than the Earth ships, took up positions nearby. They're from the Vashir Confederation, Nari said, her voice tight with anger. They received our distress signal months ago and refused to help. The Vashir sent a communication to the Dauntless. Their captain, a reptilian being with gleaming scales, appeared on screen. Humans, he said, his translator giving his voice a metallic quality. You risk much for these people who have nothing to offer you in return. We didn't come for payment, Jihu replied coldly. We came to help. A curious attitude. We came to observe, perhaps to salvage useful technology after the inevitable. Jihu's face hardened. While you watched and waited, we crossed half the galaxy to save lives. Before the Vashir could respond, alarms blared throughout the Dauntless. The Arinai sun had released a massive solar flare, far sooner than predicted. A wall of deadly radiation was heading directly toward the planet. Planetary shields failing, shouted Officer Sunho. The radiation will hit the surface in minutes. Without hesitation, Jihu gave the order. Position the Dauntless between the planet and the solar flare. Extend our shields to maximum. Captain, Our shields aren't designed for this, protested Minho. They'll fail under that much radiation. They only need to hold long enough for the other ships to get more people aboard, Jihu replied. Do it now. The Dauntless moved into position, its shields extending to cover as much of the planet as possible. The other Earthships continued the evacuation, working frantically to load as many Arinai as they could. When the solar flare hit, the Dauntless shuddered violently. On the bridge, systems sparked and failed as the radiation hammered their shields. Shield. Failure in 60 seconds, reported Sunho, his voice steady despite the danger. Captain Jihu watched the evacuation numbers climbing. Not enough. Not nearly enough. To everyone's surprise, the Vashir ships moved into position alongside the Dauntless, extending their own much more powerful shields. We will assist, said the Vashir captain, his voice now tinged with what might have been respect. Perhaps there is something to learn from humans after all. As the combined shields held back the deadly radiation, the evacuation continued. There was still much to do, and the Arinai sun grew more unstable by the hour. But for now at least, there was hope. The alarm sirens wailed throughout the ships as the Arinai sun began to collapse faster than anyone had predicted. Captain Jihu stared at the data on the main screen with growing horror. What they had thought was days of evacuation time had suddenly shrunk to mere hours. The star's core is destabilizing at an exponential rate, reported Science Officer Mina, her voice tight with tension. We have 5 hours at most before total collapse begins. So far they had evacuated nearly 30,000 Arinai aboard the Earthships and the reluctant Vashir vessels that had joined the effort. But that was less than 1% of the Arinai population. We need more time, Jihu said, his fist coming down on the console. The Arinai Councillor Nari stood quietly beside him. Perhaps it is time to accept that not all can be saved, she said. Though her voice was calm, her eyes reflected deep sorrow. You have done more than we could have hoped for. No, said Engineer Minho firmly, there must be another way. A young officer named Junho stepped forward. Captain, I have a proposal. A small team could remain behind with one ship to maintain the shield generators on the planet's surface. This could buy the evacuation fleet several more hours. A suicide mission, Jihu said flatly. Not necessarily, replied Junho. We would have the shuttle for evacuation. It would be cutting it close, but possible. Jihu looked around at his crew. I won't order anyone to stay behind. You don't have to, said Minho. I volunteer. One by one, 11 crew members stepped forward to volunteer. Jihu felt both pride and grief as he looked at them. In the end, he selected a team of 7, including Minho and Junho, to remain on the surface. As preparations continued, a message came through from the Vashir commander. Human Captain, the metallic voice translated. Our scientists have analyzed your plan. The volunteers will not survive. The final shockwave will destroy any shuttle before it can reach escape velocity. They know the risks, Jihu replied. There was a pause before the Vashir spoke again. We have observed that humans place unusual value on individual lives. This is unfamiliar to us. Every life matters, Jihu said simply. Another alien race that had arrived to observe, the crystalline Marani, unexpectedly offered their help. We can enhance your shuttle engines, their representative said. It may give your people a chance. On the planet's surface, the volunteer team worked frantically to maintain the shield generators as the sky turned blood red above them. Radiation levels climbed steadily as the star's outer layers began to peel away. In orbit, the evacuation fleet continued its work. The Vashir had finally committed fully to the rescue, their massive ships taking on thousands of Arinai refugees. Even the Marani had offered space aboard their vessels. 4 hours later, with the star now visibly collapsing in the sky, the team on the surface received the signal to evacuate. Shield Generator 4 has failed, reported Junho over the radio as they raced toward the shuttle. We have minutes at most. An Arinai scientist named Taiho approached Minho with a small device. Take this, he said urgently. It contains our historical archives, 10,000 years of our civilization. Where are you going? Minho asked as Taiho turned away. To save what I can from the Science Academy. Do not wait for me. Despite Minho's protests, Taiho ran back toward the city. Minho clutched the archive device and continued toward the shuttle. The ground beneath them was now shaking continuously. Aboard the shuttle, the team made their final preparations. "We can wait 2 more minutes," Junho said, looking at Minho. Knowing he was thinking of Taiho. Just as they were about to give up, Taiho appeared carrying a heavy case. He collapsed into the shuttle as Minho pulled him aboard. "Launch now!" Minho shouted. The shuttle lifted off as the ground below began to break apart. They rose through the atmosphere, the engines straining against the growing gravitational forces as the star's collapse accelerated. "We're not going to make it," reported the pilot grimly. "The shockwave will hit us before we reach minimum safe distance." Suddenly, a large Marani ship appeared directly above them. A tractor beam locked onto the shuttle and pulled it rapidly upward as the first major shockwave erupted from the dying star. The communication system crackled to life with the Marani captain's voice. "We could not watch you die when you had done so much to save others." From the bridge of the flagship, Captain Jihu watched in horror as the shockwave engulfed both the shuttle and the Marani ship. For several long seconds, there was nothing but static on the communication channels. Then, miraculously, the Marani ship emerged from the fiery chaos, dragging the damaged but intact shuttle with it. "All volunteers accounted for," came Minho's voice through the static. "Mission accomplished, Captain." As the evacuation fleet prepared to jump to faster-than-light speed, Captain Jihu looked one last time at the Arinai homeworld. The planet was already breaking apart as its star collapsed. But aboard the ships of the fleet, nearly 200,000 Arinai had been saved, far more than they had initially hoped for. The Arinai civilization would survive, thanks to the sacrifice and courage of those who had answered their call. In May, the quiet town of Millbrook, a place where memories seemed to linger like morning mist, Jack Sullivan returned after 15 years of unexplained absence. His unexpected arrival sent ripples through the community, especially among those who remembered him from before. Jack walked down Main Street, his weathered backpack slung over one shoulder, looking older but carrying the same intense gaze that people remembered. The local diner, still standing in its faded glory, seemed to pause as he entered. Old faces turned, whispers began, and curiosity sparked through the small space. Sarah Mitchell, who owned the diner, was the first to recognize him. Her hand trembled slightly as she poured coffee, memories flooding back from the night he disappeared. 15 years ago, Jack had vanished without a trace, leaving behind a town full of questions and unresolved mysteries. He sat quietly at the corner booth, ordering black coffee and a slice of apple pie, exactly what he used to have before that fateful night. The other customers tried not to stare, but their sideways glances betrayed their intense curiosity. Something about Jack seemed different, not just older, but changed in a way that was hard to explain. Local Sheriff Tom Reynolds, who had been a young deputy during Jack's disappearance, watched from across the room. He remembered the extensive search, the countless interviews, and the complete dead end they had reached back then. Jack's return was unexpected and somewhat unsettling. As the day progressed, more people recognized Jack. Whispers grew louder, theories started circulating. Where had he been? Why did he suddenly return? The town buzzed with speculation, each person adding their own version of what might have happened. Jack seemed calm, almost indifferent to the attention. He ordered another coffee, pulled out an old leather notebook, and began writing. His fingers moved swiftly across the page, occasionally pausing, as if remembering something significant from the past. By evening, rumors spread like wildfire. Some said he had been in witness protection, others claimed he had been traveling the world, and a few suggested he might have been involved in something dangerous. The truth remained elusive. At sunset, Jack checked into the same small motel he had lived in before his disappearance. The room seemed frozen in time, unchanged despite the years that had passed. He placed his backpack on the bed and opened it, revealing a collection of old photographs and documents. Something was clearly waiting to be revealed, a story that had been hidden for 15 long years. Jack's return was not a simple homecoming. It felt like the beginning of something much larger, a mystery about to unfold. The town watched and waited. Sheriff Reynolds began reviewing old case files, sensing that Jack's return was more than just a coincidence. The quiet streets of Millbrook, which had almost forgotten the mystery of Jack Sullivan, now buzzed with anticipation. As night fell, Jack sat by the motel window, looking out at the familiar streets. His eyes reflected a mix of determination and caution, suggesting he carried secrets that would soon change everything. The notebook lay open on the table, its pages filled with cryptic notes and sketches. The town held its breath, knowing that Jack's return meant something significant was about to happen. Whatever had kept him away for 15 years was about to be revealed, and Millbrook was at the center of a story that had been waiting to be told. One thing was certain. Jack Sullivan was not the same person who had left 15 years ago. Something had fundamentally changed, and the town would soon discover what that something was. The mystery of his disappearance and sudden return was about to unravel, promising a revelation that would shake Millbrook to its core. The night grew darker, and Jack continued to write, the soft scratching of his pen the only sound in the quiet motel room. Outside, the town slept, unaware that its most significant story was just beginning to take shape.